reversal priced in. I'm not totally sure if that's, going to pan out. I'm not
Yeah,
sure if the
the
market
last
is
the last
wrong,
week or
but
two, things have calmed down a bit. It was the prior 2 weeks, things were really kind of going to shit, and a lot of 401k values had dropped big time. And yeah, I think we should wait and see. We talk about rising prices, but you'll notice that you don't see a ton of social media going, "Can you believe how much this is?" And this and that. We don't see that just yet because had the 90-day pause, but now it's down to 60 or 58 or something. Um, so it's mostly in the stock market. It's the finance experts sounding alarms. But there it is actually real impact, at least for some people with 401ks, and they're not all a bunch of rich
yeah.
people. But they are there is a kind of a boomer aspect to that, which young people are going to be like, oh, boo hoo, right, right. But they're mostly just normal parents with savings that was kind of single handedly wiped out for a bit there, and that's scary, or not savings, but 401k investment.
I think again, like those ups and downs are always part of it, but like ultimately, I mean, the stock market's still like doing quite well, right? Like it's not like it's completely fallen off a cliff. And in general, I found the MAGA influencers saying your 401k doesn't matter, or like the Zoomers saying I don't have a 401k, which is stupid because it's
Well,
like
they
even if
might
you
one
don't
day.
have a
Yeah,
you will one day, and it's like a lot of people were just revealing how they're kinda losers, honestly.
yeah,
Like saying like, "Yeah, I have nothing in this life to live for, like, only boomers do," and it's like, "Well, you're stifling yourself. Don't you see that you're stifling yourself? Don't you see that you're actually making things worse for
yeah,
yourself?"
yeah. Yeah, so some of the Zoomers are revealing their sort of belligerent disregard for their own financial future for anybody's sometimes. Um, with the rise of retail investing, you don't even need to have a 401k exactly, but you can just, a lot of younger people have Robinhood or whatever, Webull, and um, but
I
yeah,
mean, Tesla.
yeah, it's so kind of ironic about the Tesla thing because most people who drive Teslas they lean more liberal, in fact.
Mhm.
In the last few months, if anyone's still buying it, it's not them. But if you see one on the road, they're unlikely to be some kind of maggot person. My friend lives a friend of mine lives up in Vermont, kind of liberal type and all of that, and he's got a Tesla. His wife's very liberal. He's a little bit politically indifferent. But yeah, my sister lives in England, and she's a big liberal, and she had a Tesla, and she doesn't want to drive it. And she has to, unfortunately. She's not living in London. She's kind of out in the what we call the boonies and what they might call, I don't know. Um, yeah, yeah, but yeah. Interesting what you said about Tradcath earlier. It's completely out to lunch, and I really think it's more like an art movement or something. It's just largely aesthetic. I mean, I feel like if they just got into art, like a set design on a movie somewhere, which they're probably not going to be given the politics of people who work in film. But I feel like these are the kind of people who really should be like working in the creative arts. They're not really even doing politics.
This very strange sense where you look at the trad movement in general, right? And it's a lot of it's two things, right? One, which is that yes, there is like a big aesthetic element to it. The problem is if you're not putting forth an explicit, I think this is going to change pretty soon, but if you're, for the past 10, 15 years, it's been the personal is political, right? The personal is political.
Yeah.
So when when that became the motto, when
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hollywood
I'm
said, okay,
sorry. I just realized a moment ago I was saying tradcath. It's tradcath is too specific. That's trad Catholic. I just mean trad, so I want to correct myself.
yeah, no, I figured, yeah, but I mean, what I would say is, when it comes to trads in general, I mean, like, yeah, the cat, wife, whatever
Yeah.
form of trad you want to say, I think there's sort of two, like there is the aesthetic element, right? So there's definitely people who are just in it for the aesthetic, who are in it for sort of the general sense that it's some sort of contrarianism. There's no place to really make are in the old socially sanctioned ways because, the
Yeah.
book publishers, the movie studios, all
Yeah.
of them, they have refused to publish or create anything that's not explicitly political, that's not explicitly coming from like a leftist viewpoint.
Sure.
But there's also, I think, this non I mean, there's also, I mean, a search for meaning, I think, and that's not completely aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
That's not just people being you know, trads or trads for the sake of it. I think and even
Yeah.
within that, there's sort of two categories, I would say. There's like subcategories where there's people who are just living sort of normal, basically socially conservative lives, right? They'll go to church, they'll have their kids, they'll, maybe be a stay-at-home mom or support a stay-at-home mom, right? And then there's the sort of like high strung, like aesthetically, the sort of like they're living internet lives, they're LARPing. There's that crowd. And I think, I mean, it's really the LARP crowd that winds up being far more dominant in these
Yeah.
discussions. So I think
Well, they're the
I
ones
think
that they lead the discussion because they're so online. They're the ones we see the most. Yeah.
exactly. And what the people who should, I mean, like, I think there is an alternative to that, right? There's an alternative where you just have a family and you live in the community and like you're a normal human being, but then instead what we see are like you can't ever eat a seed oil or you can't ever, like you
Yeah.
must homeschool your 10 children. And it's just like, well, that's really out of step with the majority of people. And you have to sort of be aware of that.
Yeah. And speaking of school, you wrote a report on education, at some angle
Mhm.
regarding education recently for IWF. What was that about?
Yeah, I mean, I should note I'm not here on like an official capacity
Okay.
for
Yeah.
IWF right now, so I won't I just want that as a disclaimer.
Sure.
But what I will say is, as a yeah, I mean that report is basically about just how teachers are, you know, sort of pushed down by the bureaucracy and how the bureaucracy really hurts teachers as much as it hurts students, and often it hurts students by hurting teachers. So it's on my Twitter. You can find it also on IWF's website. Again, not here on an IWF capacity. I
Yeah.
sort of have to say that, but
So
but that report is very much just about bureaucracy and about cutting down bureaucracy in schools.
okay. Yeah. I won't talk about the report anymore, but on the subject of education, seems like there's
Mhm.
long been a divide in perceptions of education. By that I mean parents, for the most part, tend to like their local school, but they think nationwide education is in a pretty bad state. Um, have you noticed that in your research or
See those numbers? I don't know how much I buy those numbers necessarily. There's a lot of
yeah,
polls that say a lot of different things. I I talk on a regular basis with parents, who are really, really sick of their children's schools pushing down ideologies, not teaching them how to read properly, using terrible
yeah,
math curriculum. And these are not necessarily conservative parents. These are often liberals. These are often apolitical people. They just sort of want their kids to be learning real things in school,
yeah.
and they're frustrated that their kids aren't learning real things in school. And these are not, I think, another thing that's maybe, and I think
It occurs to me that I might have been thinking about a poll that asked parents about what they thought of their kid's teacher specifically,
it might be the
rather than the
teachers.
school district. That it could be something more nuanced like that.
Yeah, if it's a little bit more nuanced, I know which one you're talking about, right? Because there's one like that about Congress too. Like Americans like their
Yeah,
like individual Congress people, but they don't like Congress, and that can, I mean, ultimately, like what ends up happening though is that, yeah, I think those numbers can be a little bit like it depends from place to place. Like, yes, in a lot of places there are still really great schools, and I don't think that should be discounted. I don't think we should be dooming quite so much about every individual school. Not every school has the same problem. So, we'll say, oh, schools have gotten more violent, but it's like, well, they're schools within certain socioeconomic classes specifically that have gotten really, really violent. And then you have other schools where behavior has gotten worse, but there's a difference between bad behavior and kids getting into knife fights all the time and
Yeah.
not being able to punish knife fights. The knife fights are not really an issue in the suburbs, they're an issue in inner cities, right?
Yeah. My my own school is one of the ones that sadly declined a great deal. I went to school in South Sacramento, a high school called Florin High School, and
Mhm.
we had some drama back in the 90s. There was a like a drive-by shooting the day before sophomore year. We had, it's kind of sad. We laughed at the time and thought it was sort of funny, but you'd actually have like these fights after school where it's like, oh, it's the Asians versus the Mexicans, and oh, it's gonna be black versus Mexican, and they're like, oh, they're gonna kick your ass and all that. So we had things like that, and some more severe violence. But since then, it's gotten much worse. There's now a huge fence around the school. A few years ago, a video went viral of a student in a high school body slamming the principal, and that is unfortunately my school, Florin High. So yeah, I've
Mhm.
seen the decline firsthand. I didn't see the body slamming firsthand, but in my experience, my school has unfortunately gone down the proverbial tubes. Um, but yeah, so there's a lot of variation at school to school. Um, yeah. Do you have you done much research on homeschooling? You mentioned it a moment ago with the trads and the homeschooling 10 kids. Has that number budged, or is it still maybe about 10%, 8% of students?
Homeschooling has risen, and I actually think, I mean, since the pandemic in particular, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of very interesting and I think positive trends going on in homeschooling too. I don't think I think what I get annoyed about is when people say, "Oh, everyone must homeschool and all public schools are evil and this and that." I was like, "Well, that's not true, right?" But I do think there's a lot of very independently positive things that have come out of homeschooling recently. You have a lot of co-op programs. I think there's a lot of parents who will make use of the public schools too, right? Like there's, I think, especially with school choice programs, parents realize, oh, well, I can, put my child in, say, math enrichment classes at the local public school, but sort of do homeschooling otherwise. Like there's
Yeah.
different opportunities, there's different sorts of approaches that people can take, and I think especially in this moment, right? When schools have really screwed up really badly, right? They have, I mean, COVID was an outrage, right? The lockdowns were an outrage. The fact that schools stayed so closed so long, and that they had mask mandates for so long, that they imposed vaccine mandates on kids who had no business taking those vaccines. All those things, I mean, that's just the COVID front, but then there's also just gender ideology, right? There are schools that
Sure.
people think you're lying when you say, "Oh, the schools are transing kids behind their parents' backs," because it sounds so outrageous, but it's a real thing that happens. And often, I mean, there are literally policies in schools that force parents to, I mean, force teachers basically not to tell the parents that their kid is transitioning. So these are real district policies. If you go onto the website by the think tank Defending Education, they have a list of every single school district in America with such a policy, that they're always updating. It's a great resource. But when schools are doing that sort of thing, I think they have given up any authority to be able to say, "Oh, well, everybody should just be coming here," right?
Yeah.
I think we benefit from more choice.
Yeah. Even if the issue of trans is, overstated and it doesn't really figure into, most parents and kids' day-to-day lives in school, and I'm sure it doesn't. The issue is so foundational and basically existential. So, men and women, right? And like it's very important, and you want to make sure it never does become uh, totally normative. And maybe the way to do that is to um, give off the impression that this situation is worse than it is in the given moment. I don't mind, I think the implications of it are so much greater than um, former iterations of gay rights. This breaks with reality in a way prior gay rights movements did not. Uh, so yeah, I think it's worth talking a lot about. You can nitpick certain claims, right? And conservatives often will step, they put their foot in their mouth by making directly refutable specific claims, and that gets at
Mhm.
the fact that conservatives. So there's this notion of elite human capital, like EHC. It's
Yes.
I kind of subscribe to that school, except I'm not.
Mhm.
I think it's like descriptively correct, but prescriptively I'm more kind of egalitarian and not elitist. But there that is a problem. The descriptive aspect of that is important because it shapes strategy, political strategy, and conservatives are simply not as bright as liberals in general, and so they end up kind of dying on hills that aren't worth dying on, and it's a shame because they do care more about this issue of transing, and they need to be smarter about how the
Actually,
way they attack it.
I'm actually not sure if that's true anymore, to be completely honest. I grew up among liberals. I went to an elite liberal arts college. Like I'm basically completely the demographic profile of a coastal liberal elite, except I'm not liberal. But I don't know. I mean, I think in the past 5 years or so, liberals have I mean, they've enforced this sort of conformism that has driven out a lot of really bright people. I think conservatives have actually they've benefited from the arbitrage a little bit. They have been able to poach people they otherwise would not have been able to poach. I
Yeah.
think they have also just generally, I mean, liberals, I think there are just fewer, for instance, men, right, willing to be like Democratic staffers just because there's fewer men who want to work in Democratic politics and there's fewer male Democrats. When you lose
Yeah.
out on young men who want to work for you or sane young men who want to work for you because you're driving them out and calling them oppressors, I don't know how that's elite human capital. The people who are left over in those positions are not especially bright, and they
Yeah,
are
well,
even
I think what they're doing is kind of evil, but they're not right. Um, and now they might appear. So if you've grown up in that kind of milieu, so it doesn't. You've gotten used to it, and they might just look about at the level of midwit. Remember when that term was going around? Um, and but it's the much of the country that you're not that exposed to that I am exposed to maybe more often than someone in Boston. I don't know. But my milieu has both mostly been very similar to yours. I went to California public school, Northern California, and then I was in the Bay Area for a very long time. And I've seen the ugly, um, non-EHC side of the left. But most of my coworkers, like in a white collar environment, are like liberal Democrat and defend things like trans. And I would absolutely say that they're brighter than the typical person that I see in the environment I'm in now. I'm not going to say anything specific about.
honestly, I mean, like in general, I mean, okay, brightness, whatever. Like, you're looking at different classes of people, you're looking at different education levels and all that.
Yeah.
Understood. But I mean, even in terms of just general brightness, I don't. I I think Republicans tolerate more crazy behavior from elected officials in particular, like just outright crazy. I like
Yeah.
on the trans issue, for instance, it's like let's not be jerks, right? Let's be kind about it. I get that it's in defiance of reality. I get that it's crazy what's going on. That's awful. But when we're speaking with people, we want to be sane. We want to be normal. And like we also have to understand these are suffering people often who are hurting, who are, going through a lot and just being jerks almost never helps in optics. At the same time, I think one thing that's genuinely also changed is that I think again, there's a lot more white collar types who are quietly willing to be like, I actually don't really like this liberal status quo. I actually really don't like the pronoun stuff. I don't like TEI. I don't like, and Trump has enabled them in a good way, right? So I think there's definitely been a vibe shift. I've noticed, among Indian immigrants, for instance, like they used to think I was crazy. Like when I was a never Trump
Yeah.
Republican in high school, they used to think I was crazy, that I was so conservative, and that they thought I was like a far right winger or fascist or something. And now it's like a lot of them voted for Trump. I know so many Indian immigrants and Indian Americans who are Biden Trump voters. I myself am a Biden Trump voter, right? So I think seeing that sort of thing is just like I don't. I don't necessarily think that Democrats have the late human capital. That doesn't necessarily mean that Republicans have it either. I think what Republicans have, the smartest people among the Republicans are often incredibly resentful, is something I've noticed. There's a
Yeah,
lot of deeply, deeply resentful, angry people. And I get it. I get where the resentment comes from. I get where the anger comes from. I feel it too. But it's like you have to fight with everything you have against that. Because if you stay stuck to your resentment, if you stay stuck to your anger, if you stay stuck to your rage, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. And ultimately,
yeah,
politics and culture and arts and anything that's about just maintaining and creating society is not going to be fueled by resentment. It's not going to be sustained by resentment.
yeah. The whole notion of elite human capital involves kind of a combination of both raw IQ and intelligence and certain idealism, are willing to
Mhm,
forego a normal life script for some chance at changing society. And
mhm,
so, in that way, one problem with conservatives, they don't go into politics as much as Democrats. But well,
mhm,
even if they go to college, they can't wait to get out and make some money and then just go have a nice family life, right?
mhm.
There are more Democrats willing to take the lower paying jobs, forego having kids, get involved in
Yeah.
politics, stay in the big city, where real power players are at. It's at such a level that they can still have the family all in the expensive city, right? They don't have to
Mhm.
flee the state of California, right?
I would
Um,
say not the forego the children, that aside, because I think that's like just a bad democratic. I mean, not bad necessarily. Like if it's a like there's obviously like this very anti-natal sentiment among Democrats. I think that's a little bit different, but I think everything else with Republicans, like you I don't know. I think there's a lot of, especially young Republicans, who are willing to move, who are willing to be in the city, who are willing to sort of move and shake things. Like, I think most cities these days are having like a resurgence of like young, like vaguely conservative people. I've met such people in all sorts of cities. I know of such people in all sorts of cities. You see the tech right. And it's not, again, it's not necessarily that, oh, all of them are necessarily even Republicans, right? But they're not they're not woke, they're not lefties. They recognize that something's really broken in American society. I think they want to fix it in ways that they're not given credit for by that elite human capital theory, because you look at, again, like I do think that theory is correct to some extent for like oh yeah, like Republicans haven't been willing to do all these things in the past, but I think they are now. And
yeah,
I think
yeah,
I
and
think
I
that that's
one problem.
changed.
I'll just say one problem with elite human capital is it has a kind of a static view of society. That has it like a status quo bias. Richard Hanania is kind of like this. He's just sort of he does this
Mhm.
apologetics for the current ruling elite a lot. Even though about 5 years ago you thought he'd be right there with the conservatives, but he sort of counter signals constantly. That's
Yeah.
saying things like everyone in college or in these elite universities, like 99% of them are there because they really are elite, flat out. Like they're just better human beings in basically every dimension. And I'm like, no, no. What I think what has happened is that these trends in the attempt to stake out a spot in elite institutions has been coming from a certain demographic with a certain mindset for a while, and in time it will change. So for a lot of the EHC thinking is very sort of justifies the status quo in the sense that if conservatives, if it were possible for conservatives to be elite, they'd already be in charge, right? So whatever currently existing elite exists is the natural elite, and what they do is just and right. So it's a little bit just so. Um, but yeah, like you say, they're starting to change, right? Because I think for too long, too many conservatives, the smartest conservatives, didn't go into politics; they went into business, and they need to
Yeah.
start thinking more like the political.
And I think actually, one thing I actually have some apprehensions in general about is actually I think there's too many conservatives who do go into politics, who do go into think tanks, who do go. I mean, I'm in a think tank, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not calling it myself necessarily, but I'm just saying, they'll go into politics, journalism, think tank. I think there's a lot of people in these fields
yeah,
but they're not going into arts nearly as much. They're not going into culture nearly as much. But that's also because the dynamic has shifted, right? So it used to be that uh, there were avenues to go into arts or culture or academia that didn't totally suck. Right now, it's like, okay, if you go get a PhD, right, you're not necessarily studying with somebody who even knows what they're talking about these days because the ideological capturing of these universities has become so total that it's not clear that you're actually getting out of it what you would have gotten say 30 years ago, right? If you go to Los Angeles, it's like, well, the movie industry is kind of dead these days, right? So it's like even the scrappy like be a waiter thing, so I actually think there's too much artistic energy in politics that should be in the arts. And I think because we have so much artistic energy in politics, we also have a lot of influencer wannabes and politics and journalism and all these sorts of things where it's like, well, you clearly don't want to be in politics. You actually seem to want to, be in a movie. You seem to want to maybe write a novel or a play or music or something. But instead, you're sort of relegated to politics because that's the only that's the only thing for like humanity's brained conservative to do.
Yeah,
So actually,
if you're
that's
if
my
you're
bigger
a
concern.
conservative, if you're an artistically inclined conservative, the conservative aspect of you is very, very salient in a way that it is not if you're a progressive inclined and in the arts, because everyone is
Mhm.
progressive inclined in the arts, right? So
Yep.
yeah, that's taken for granted. Whereas, yeah, if you lean conservative, you that aspect of you might engender a self-conscious political orientation in a way it doesn't for the casual member of a Netflix crew who of course is progressive, but they can devote 95% of their time to set design and makeup. So I think there's a lot of would-be artists who are like on Substack and stuff. Some of the younger right, yeah, they clearly are more enchanted by culture. I myself did do a think tank thing a while ago, years ago. I was an intern at the Independent Institute, and yeah, it was just a lot of policy wonkery, economics. Um, but what a lot of the right wanted to talk about is movies, racial dynamics in movies, and all the stuff that progressives get to talk about now. They have the freedom to do, and but the right is the last few years has been able to change, but they've had to be very cagey about it because they're not going to get to work at Bustle or The Cut or Variety or Hollywood Reporter. They're not going to.
But none of those places even matter anymore,
Well,
right? Like,
increasingly they do not. Yeah.
and I think that's the big studios don't matter anymore. The big publishers, like who reads all of like I mean like you'll see all this literary fiction, right? Who even reads that stuff? I mean it's MFA politicized garbage half the time. It's the writers they all have the same general groupthink to them. And what I notice is that because there's this groupthink, because there's this sort of like that's impeded them from creating art. So this is where I really diverge from the elite human capital stuff again, where it's like I actually think that in-group conformity, and because that in-group conformity demands loyalty to ideas that suck and don't make any sense, right? Like the idea that you can change sexist, right? I think there is or could have been a potentially more like there could have been a potentially more, how do I say this?
I,
Uh,
I
like
think I think what's different. I know what you're saying, right? Like, because the ideas are ridiculous, but they're able to defend the ideas in a way that is internally valid. That shows that
I
they have a very
can.
large vocabulary and a very strong ability to think comprehensively. So you
I
could be
actually I
intelligent but wayward at kind of a meta level, morally especially.
well, I think that's true and that's not because I mean I also think about like you look at like I studied Russian in college, right? So it's like like I have a lot of random Russian references. That's why they come up. But I one thing I found is that when I am talking with, I mean, like when I read books, right, by like Lenin or Trotsky or all of these people, like they were. they had evil ideas, they did evil things, Lenin did evil things, but they were genuinely brilliant men, right? And you read their writing, and they're engaging, they're interesting. You read the writing of, I mean, even like like left-wing radicals in the 70s and the 80s, like throughout, like in America. I mean, you know, those were genuinely smart people with complex vocabularies who could sort of create some sort of internal logic. I don't think that describes today's activists. Like, I really don't.
Hmm.
I think those are what do you like it's a thought terminating cliches, right? They're always thinking in thought terminating cliches, so
Yeah.
they just never have the they don't have the ability to form coherent thoughts. They've never been faced with an opposition, which means that they have no inoculation against these bad ideas. I mean,
Well,
against
yeah,
any ideas, right?
I agree with that, but it's only it's what I'm saying. It's relative to their conservative counterparts. It's all relative, you know. Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean,
prior iterations of the
I
left
just
were
think
more intelligent.
I think prior generations were more intelligent. I think current generations of the right are also more intelligent. I think
Yeah,
the
it's
sheer number of smart, interesting people, most of whom, you know, were at some point liberals, right? Most of whom,
yeah,
like, and I count women as well as men, but I've met enough of these people, and they're not, again, they're not all super MAGA people. They're not all trads necessarily. I've met really smart libertarians, really smart people across the sort of political aisle of non liberals, non woke. But one thing I genuinely I think elite human capital describes an older era. I really do. I think today today things have changed enough that if you're on the left, like you might have like even college education means less and less these days, right? Even
yeah,
college education, like having a college education doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you can do certain things. It doesn't mean you can read or write or think or do math.
well,
I,
relative to some
I
things
do
did
think
and go,
sometimes,
it probably does. But
yeah,
yeah,
I do think sometimes conservatives go too far in deriding all those things, but I also think sometimes they don't realize, you know, how bad like liberal society has gotten, how much dumber it's gotten.
yeah,
Like, again, I've spent my entire life in liberal society, and I've been shocked at how much dumber it's gotten and how less refined, less intelligent, less cultured things are these
yeah.
days. So I don't
I've definitely seen the dumb side of I've seen the dumb side of the side that is associated with EHC. You know, people get, you know, they get trickle down EHC ideas like trans stuff, and they're nowhere near as eloquent in defending it as I don't know, Judith Butler or something. So I've seen that. You know, I've seen their belligerent ignorance. Oh, I was going to mention a few minutes ago. In your research on education, how many teachers are actually childless? Is it like unusually high, like more than one might think, given that they work with children? I mean, I don't.
Like that's a good question. I don't think I've looked into that
Okay.
actually. So I would I would like to look into that. I think I mean I've been a teacher before actually. So I mean most of my colleagues had kids. I felt like so it
Okay.
wasn't I don't think it would be unusually high. Although you might have a slightly higher than average maybe number of 20 somethings working in teaching.
Yeah. I think they elementary school is a little more female and it skews younger, I think.
Definitely,
Um,
yeah.
but anyway, cool. So it's nice talking to you, Neeraja.
Nice talking with you too. Thank you so
Take
much.
care.